Officers Daniel Rowe and Megan Clarke thought they were answering a simple 911 call, a routine noise complaint on a quiet Friday night in Willow Creek. But within hours, both would vanish without a trace, leaving behind only a blood-stained badge, a dead radio, and a mystery that would haunt the entire town. The night began like any other in the quiet town of Willow Creek, a small community tucked between rolling hills and thick patches of forest. It was the kind of place where the loudest sound most evenings was a barking dog or the distant hum of a passing truck. At the police station, the air was calm. The night shift officers were catching up on paperwork, sipping coffee, and chatting idly about weekend plans. Nothing ever really happened in Willow Creek, at least not the kind of thing that made the news. At 8:47 p.m., that calm shattered. Dispatch picked up a 911 call that began with heavy breathing and faint static. The voice on the other end was a woman's, trembling and urgent. She said she lived near an old farmhouse on Ridgeway Road and had been hearing screams, short, sharp, and desperate, from across the field. She didn't give her name or address. She only whispered, "Please send someone fast," before the line went dead. Attempts to call back failed. The number showed up as restricted, which was unusual for such a rural area. Officer Daniel Rowe and Officer Megan Clarke were dispatched to check it out. Both had been on the force for years and had handled everything from domestic disputes to wild animal calls. This one sounded routine enough, a possible disturbance, maybe teenagers playing a prank, maybe a domestic issue. Nothing out of the ordinary. Still, the unease in the caller's voice lingered in the air long after the call ended. The two officers set out in their cruiser, headlights cutting through the darkness as they followed the narrow dirt road leading to Ridgeway. The further they drove, the more isolated it became. Houses thinned out, the road turned rough, and even the cell signal dropped away. The radio crackled faintly, carrying the sound of dispatch giving brief updates, but the connection faded in and out. Outside, the moon was high and cold, casting a pale glow over the empty field. As they neared the property, Officer Clarke noted how strange it was that no one else had reported anything. If there were screams loud enough to alarm a neighbor, someone else in the area should have heard too. Yet as the car rolled to a stop at the edge of the property, everything was silent. No lights, no movement, no sound but the hum of insects. The farmhouse stood about 100 yards ahead, dark and still. It looked old, almost forgotten, with boards missing from the porch and a mailbox leaning to one side. The gravel drive was overgrown with weeds, and no tire marks showed recent activity. Officer Rowe switched off the headlights, and the world around them vanished into black. For a moment, neither spoke. The silence was thick, unnatural. They stepped out of the cruiser, flashlights in hand, boots crunching softly on the gravel. The air smelled faintly of rain and something else, something metallic and sour. They approached the gate, which hung crookedly from one hinge, and pushed it open with a slow creak. From somewhere deep in the field, an owl called, and then the night fell silent again. The officers exchanged a glance, both sensing that something about this call wasn't as simple as it had sounded. As they started up the path toward the farmhouse, their flashlights swept over the peeling paint, the shattered windows, and the faint outline of an open door waiting at the top of the steps. What had begun as a simple 911 response was already starting to feel like a trap waiting to be discovered. The air around the farmhouse felt heavier with each step the officers took. The property seemed frozen in time, swallowed by weeds and silence. As they walked closer, the creak of the old wooden steps broke the stillness. The front door was ajar, rocking slightly with the breeze, its hinges whining like a faint cry. A single porch light flickered weakly above them, buzzing as if trying to come back to life. It cast just enough light to reveal muddy footprints leading inside. Officer Clarke tried to call in their location, but the radio filled with static. Her words broke apart before reaching dispatch. She adjusted the antenna, but it was no use. The connection was dead. Officer Rowe tried his own, tapping the device against his shoulder, but only the faint hiss of interference answered. The house sat too far from town, surrounded by dense trees that seemed to swallow every signal. With no other choice, they decided to investigate first and report back later. They entered slowly, flashlight slicing through the darkness. The smell hit immediately. Damp, musty, mixed with something sharper beneath it, like old copper. Dust coated everything. The furniture looked untouched for years, yet a trail of dirt led across the floor as if someone had recently walked through. A single chair was overturned in the middle of the room. Beside it, a half-burned candle sat in a glass jar, its wax hardened in a strange spiral pattern. Their lights swept over family photos on the wall. Most of the faces had been scratched out, leaving only faint outlines. It wasn't vandalism that caught their attention. It was precision. Each face had been removed carefully, deliberately with a knife or blade. The unease grew stronger. A faint sound came from deeper in the house. It wasn't a scream this time, but a soft shuffle, like fabric brushing against the floor. The officers moved toward it, keeping close together. Every floorboard groaned under their boots, echoing down the narrow hallway. At the end of it, a door stood half open, revealing a staircase leading upward. The faint light of the moon spilled across the first few steps, but beyond that, it was nothing but darkness. Officer Rowe signaled with a nod, and they began to climb. Each step seemed louder than the last. The house felt alive, creaking and breathing in rhythm with their movements. As they reached the top, a gust of cold air swept down the hallway, carrying with it the faint smell of smoke. A single door stood at the end, slightly ajar, its doorknob glinting faintly in the beam of their flashlights. Inside the room, the curtains were torn, the wallpaper peeled, and a rocking chair swayed gently in the corner, though there was no wind. On the floor lay a cell phone, cracked and dusty. Officer Rowe crouched to examine it. It was still warm to the touch, as if someone had been holding it moments earlier. He looked around, scanning every shadow, every corner. Somewhere below, the front door groaned again. The sound was distant but unmistakable. Someone, or something, had entered the house behind them. The officers froze, straining to listen. There was a faint whisper of movement downstairs, soft but steady, like cautious footsteps on the old wooden floor. The sound stopped just as suddenly as it had started. In that silence, surrounded by the smell of dust and decay, both officers realized that whatever they had walked into wasn't just an abandoned farmhouse. Something else was here with them, waiting in the dark. The silence in the house was suffocating. The officers stood at the top of the stairs, flashlights trembling slightly in their hands. Every sound seemed magnified, the creak of the old floorboards beneath their boots, the distant groan of the shifting house. Officer Rowe's pulse thudded in his ears as he tried to steady his breathing. The air felt colder now, sharper, carrying the faint scent of smoke and something else, something metallic. Downstairs, something moved again. A slow scrape, like a chair being dragged across the floor. Both officers exchanged a look that needed no words. They had handled dangerous situations before, but this felt different. There was no shouting, no commotion, just the quiet, deliberate sounds of someone moving in the dark. Whoever was in the house wasn't panicked. They were calm. Officer Clarke adjusted her grip on her flashlight and motioned toward the bedroom door at the end of the hall. It was open just a few inches wider than before. The rocking chair inside was still moving, swaying gently back and forth. No breeze reached this far into the house, and yet it didn't stop. Einzeit, the faint rhythm of it filled the hallway, the wooden creak of the chair blending with the pounding of their hearts. Rowe stepped forward first, his light sweeping across the floor. Dust floated in the air, disturbed by their movements. He crouched near the phone lying in the middle of the floor and noticed smudges on the wall, fingerprints smeared across the faded wallpaper. Some were large, others smaller, like those of a child. They led toward the closet in the far corner of the room. The door was shut tight. Before he could reach it, the sound of footsteps rushed up from the stairs behind them, fast, heavy, deliberate. Both officers spun around, lights flashing toward the hallway. Nothing. The sound stopped halfway up the stairs. A shadow flickered briefly against the far wall, then vanished. Officer Clarke called out, announcing themselves, her voice steady but tense. There was no reply, only the echo of her words bouncing off the walls. A crash followed. The door at the end of the hall slammed shut with a force that rattled the old windows. The rocking chair stopped. Officer Rowe grabbed the handle and tried to pull it open, but it wouldn't budge. It felt like someone was holding it from the other side. The sound of movement came again, this time from multiple directions. The stairs, the hallway, the attic above. It was chaos, footsteps circling them, closing in from every angle. The flashlight beams shook as the two backed into each other, trying to keep watch in every direction. Then, from behind, something struck hard. Officer Clarke stumbled forward, her flashlight clattering to the floor. Rowe turned and caught a glimpse of a figure in the corner, tall, masked, face hidden beneath what looked like an old burlap sack. Another shadow moved behind him, fast and silent. The room erupted into violence. The officers fought to defend themselves, but there were too many attackers. Their radios blared static as if someone was trying to break through, the sound crackling wildly before cutting off completely. The flashlight beams danced erratically across the walls, revealing glimpses of boots, gloved hands, and flashes of dull metal. Within seconds, the chaos ended as quickly as it began. The lights rolled to a stop, beams pointing in opposite directions. The rocking chair began to move again, creaking softly in the aftermath. Downstairs, the front door swung open, then slowly shut, leaving the house once again in perfect chilling silence. By the time backup arrived, the house was silent again. The front door stood open, swaying gently in the cold night breeze. The patrol car remained parked at the gate, headlights still on, radio humming faintly. But inside, there was no sign of Officers Rowe or Clarke. The search team entered cautiously, weapons drawn, flashlights sweeping across the rooms. Every surface was coated in dust, yet the signs of a struggle were unmistakable. Scattered debris, overturned furniture, and streaks of dirt leading toward the stairs. One of the flashlights caught something metallic beneath the table. It was a badge, smeared with blood and dirt, the number barely visible. Outside, more units arrived. The property was cordoned off, and the search expanded into the surrounding fields. Dozens of officers combed through the tall grass, calling out the missing officers' names, their voices echoing into the emptiness. The night was cold, the ground damp from a light rain earlier in the evening. The only sounds were boots crunching through the grass and the steady hum of generators lighting the scene. Hours passed, but nothing was found. By morning, the case had already drawn attention from neighboring counties. Detectives arrived, setting up a command post near the road. Inside the house, forensic teams worked carefully, collecting fingerprints, footprints, and fibers. They found signs that someone had been living there recently. Discarded food wrappers, old clothing, and a pile of cigarette butts hidden behind the kitchen door. Yet there were no clear leads, no clue as to who had made the mysterious 911 call. Neighbors were questioned, but few had seen anything unusual. The closest home was nearly half a mile away. One farmer claimed he sometimes saw lights flickering inside the house late at night, though he assumed teenagers were sneaking in. Another mentioned hearing a vehicle around dusk a few days earlier, but he couldn't describe it. The deeper detectives dug, the stranger the story became. The property they discovered had once belonged to a man named Lester Crowe, a name familiar to older residents. Crowe had vanished years ago after being accused of several violent assaults in the area. His house was abandoned soon after, though rumors claimed someone still visited occasionally. 3 days into the search, the first major discovery was made. A pair of torn uniform sleeves were found caught on a barbed wire fence behind the house. The fabric was soaked and stained, matching the department's standard issue. Not far from that spot, they found faint footprints leading toward the woods, but no clear trail beyond the first few yards. The prints simply stopped. That same night, a farmer reported finding something strange near a creek 2 miles away, a body lying face down in the mud. It was Officer Clarke. Her uniform was torn, her radio missing. There were marks on her wrists and neck, but no sign of gunfire. The strangest part was how the area around her was untouched. No footprints, no tire marks, nothing. It looked as if she had been placed there deliberately. News spread quickly through the department, hitting every officer like a blow. The search for Officer Rowe intensified. Helicopters circled the woods, dogs were brought in, and the fields were searched again and again. Then, on the fourth night just after midnight, the dispatch center received a call from an unlisted number. It was faint, broken by static, but the voice was unmistakable. It was Officer Rowe whispering just one word, abysement, before the line went dead. The call from Officer Rowe sent shockwaves through the command post. It lasted less than 10 seconds, yet every person in that room knew it changed everything. The word abasement echoed through the static before the line went silent. Technicians tried to trace the signal, but it bounced between nearby towers as if the source was being masked or moved. The only certainty was that it came from somewhere close to the farmhouse. Within minutes, a new team was on the way, moving through the fog-covered fields toward the property that had already haunted them for days. The house looked even more sinister in the early hours of the morning. Mist clung to the grass, and the air was thick with the smell of decay. The team entered through the same open door where Rowe and Clarke had disappeared. The layout was now familiar, but the unease was worse. Every creak sounded heavier. Every shadow seemed to move on its own. They split into pairs, sweeping each room again, calling Officer Rowe's name in low voices that never got an answer. When one of the officers reached the kitchen, he noticed something strange about the floor. A large section of the old boards near the pantry looked newer than the rest, as though they had been replaced recently. Kneeling down, he ran his hand across the seams and felt a faint draft rising through the crack. They pried the boards up carefully, revealing a narrow set of steps leading into total darkness. The air that drifted out was cold and stale, thick with the smell of damp earth and rust. Flashlights flickered as the team descended, their boots crunching on the dirt floor below. The basement was small and windowless, the walls lined with old tools, chains, and rotting wood. Near the far wall was a heavy wooden door, half hidden behind stacked crates. The team forced it open. Inside was a small room, no more than 6 feet wide, lined with insulation foam. In the center of that room lay Officer Rowe. He was alive, barely conscious, tied at the wrists and ankles, gagged and covered in bruises. His eyes opened weakly as the light hit his face. Paramedics rushed in moments later, cutting him free and checking his pulse. He whispered fragments of words disjointed and faint, but enough to make every person there go still. The attack hadn't been random. The people who ambushed them weren't strangers. They were trained, organized. As Rowe recovered in the hospital, he slowly began to piece together what had happened. He told investigators that the group who attacked them was part of a rogue organization made up of former law enforcement officers and ex-military members who believed they were above the system. They lured active duty officers to remote locations under fake 911 calls, testing responses, targeting those who had once worked with them. Their goal was revenge against the department that had disbanded their secret operations years ago. The farmhouse had been their meeting place. The woman's voice on the 911 call had been a recording. Everything, from the open door to the scattered items, had been staged to draw the officers in. After the ambush, Rowe had been kept alive as bait. His phone used to send the final message once they knew the search would return. Authorities arrested several suspects in the following weeks, but the group's leader, known only by the initials IPC, was never found. The farmhouse was torn down soon after, but locals said they could still hear faint radio static near Ridgeway Road. Like a lingering echo from the night, the officers answered that simple 911 call and discovered how deep the darkness in their town truly ran.